Yeah, so that's what happens when you go on vacation. You get a complete brain wipe, then you've got to like start all over again. Yeah, and I was just waiting to hear from Shara, who we understand is the conductor and makes the trains run on time. And since she just said it was okay to start, I will begin the meeting. Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to see you all again. This is the May 28th, 2026 meeting, Little Hoover Commission hearing on IT project delivery in California State Government, Part 2. My name is Pedro Nava. I'm the chair of the Little Hoover Commission. Thank you all for joining us today. We have other commissioners who are with us. We will be joined by Vice Chair Anthony Canella. Dion Aroner will also attend. David Byer, Jana Sidley, Gil Garcetti. Also with us today are members of the commission staff. Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, Project Managers Crystal Beckham, Daniel Harris McCoy, and Analyst Sheriff McAllister, Gibran Maciel, and Jenna Waite. As usual, I've got to do some housekeeping. We're live streaming today's hearing on Zoom, and we'll have a public comment session at the end of our hearing. Commissioners' audio and video will remain on throughout the hearing. Commissioners, you may mute yourselves if you wish. The video and audio of this hearing will be turned on when it is their turn to speak so that witnesses will have their opportunity. Members of the public joining us online are muted during the hearing. If you would like to make a public comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom by clicking on the hand icon to join our comment queue. Those joining by phone can dial *9 to raise their hand or email us at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. Please include your phone number that you're used to join the meeting so that staff can identify and then unmute you. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and comment requests throughout the hearings. If you are present at our in-person location and want to comment, please notify one of our staff members. As usual, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We are recording this hearing. Afterwards, a permanent link to the video will be posted on our website and uploaded to our YouTube channel. And now to the substance of today's hearing. And before I launch into that, I really do want to express praise for staff and the work that they did to put this memo together. Those members of the commissioners and members of the public who take a look at the paperwork ahead of the meeting, I think will be impressed with the level of detail and the scholarship that went into providing the background memo, which is the starting point for this discussion today. This is the second in a series of commission hearings examining how California plans, procures, and delivers major IT systems, software, data systems, and other digital tools that support state operations and public services. State IT projects have too often been marked by delays, cost overruns, underperforming systems, and in some cases, outright failure. Although, if you take a look at prior work by commission staff, you will see that the rate of success for government operations actually excels oftentimes that in the private sector. In our April meeting, the commission heard from former state leaders and technology experts about the structural, cultural, and procurement-related challenges that have contributed to these problems. Today's hearing builds on that discussion by exploring what more modern, effective, and user-centered approaches to technology delivery can look like in practice. The commission will hear from witnesses with expertise in digital service reform, innovation, and workforce development, large-scale public sector data systems, and technology procurement and implementation. Again, praise to staff for putting together a lineup of witnesses. I think we'll all be suitably impressed. These witnesses include leaders who have helped shape federal digital service efforts, build California's own innovation infrastructure, and rethink how governments design and deliver technology. Their testimony will help inform the Commission's understanding of how California might improve the planning, procurement, and delivery of major technology initiatives. Next month, the Commission will conclude its study by hearing from current state leadership and other practitioners responsible for overseeing and implementing major technology initiatives in California government today. I want to thank Vice Chair Cannella and Commissioner Johnson for their leadership on this study subcommittee. Now I want to inform the witnesses, as is my practice. You will learn, and if you watched commission hearings, commissioners have read your material. They, in all likelihood, already have formed some questions they want to ask you. I used to say they may interrupt you, but I think it's probably more benign to say they will join you in your presentation by asking you questions when they raise their hands. So please, as witnesses, consider this a compliment. And with that, let me turn it over to Project Manager Daniel Harris McCoy.
Thank you, Chairman Nava. Our first witness is Jennifer Pahlka, who is the author of Recoding America, Why Government is Failing in the Digital Age and How We Can Do Better, and a senior fellow at the Niskanen Center and the Federation of American Scientists. She founded Code for America in 2010 and led the organization for 10 years. In 2013, Pahlka took a leave of absence to serve as U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officer under President Obama and helped found the United States Digital Service. She is a graduate of Yale University. Ms. Pahlka, you may begin your testimony.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here. I'm delighted that it worked out to be today. I had arranged put together some remarks that I was going to make and have changed them up quite a bit at the last minute, and I'll explain why. I have sat on commissions like yours before. I think the Defense Innovation Board was quite a bit like what you do, and I know how engaging and difficult and interesting it can be. I also know that it can be frustrating to dive deep into a lot of problems and see the solutions, but not see the state move towards the solutions that commissions come up with, or to say that they are adopting these recommendations, but nothing really seems to change in the long run. I'm delighted that this is happening today because I feel like there's a really great example that I want to share with you all that California could really follow. What we normally do in these testimony is sort of what I call the recitation of the maladies, go through all of the projects that have gone over budget or have had bad outcomes or have disappointed the people who need to use them. And I'm not going to do that because I think you know this already, and I think you've had many other speakers in the last hearing and probably after me will have much better proof points. I'm not tracking California as closely as many others are. I'm really tracking the whole country and all of the states that are struggling with this very outdated model for procuring and building technology. So I'm going to skip over all of that, except to say one thing, which is that as you continue this, make sure you're getting the staff level view as well as the high level view. I know you had Ryan Coe on in your last one or one before, who has a view of it from what's actually happening in the trenches, and that is really, really important for you in order to have a true, honest picture of what's really going on. What I want to say is that there's a lot that is going on in this space of reform in government IT generally. And I've come to the conclusion that most of what happens is actually extending the life of a system. And I mean a system broadly. I don't mean a particular IT system, but a framework in which we build and buy technology that just needs to die. It needs to go away. It needs to be replaced by something new. And we're doing a lot of hacks around the edges. We're doing a lot of things that make things a little bit better in the short term. But what they're doing is keeping us from the hard work of actually shifting to a new way of doing things in a much more fundamental way. I have borrowed from philanthropy the idea of the 3 horizons framework, in which the first horizon is the status quo, which you know to be unsustainable. I think everybody here understands that the way we are doing this is not sustainable. It's not, especially not going to be sustainable in a budget-constrained environment, and one in which there are greater demands put on government because of things like workforce disruption from AI. It is going to get worse, and it is not. It is not going to survive that transition. The third horizon is the system that we need to get to, and the work happens in that messy middle, that second horizon. But we have to distinguish between second horizon work that just artificially extends the life of the system as we have it by making hacks around it and workarounds and little improvements, and the things that we do that actually push us toward the new model that we must adopt in order to survive, in order to be able to serve the citizens of these states in a way that they deserve to be served at a cost that they are willing to pay. The thing that happened that I'm so excited about is that just yesterday, the state of Colorado announced that they are completely transforming their Office of Information Technology. They have something called the Colorado Digital Service. It's much like the US Digital Service, or there's been sort of variants of it in California. Office of Innovation, I think, is sort of meant to be that here in California. You see it in New Jersey, you see it in Pennsylvania, where there's sort of the legacy IT shop, and then this group on the side that's doing things in what we call the product model instead of the project model. I'm not going to go in depth on what all those things are. You can read all this stuff. It's very clear. This is not a mystery. There's no special sauce to it. It's just from one model to another model. And so they've had this team that's been working for the past 7 years, I believe. It's been a pretty small team, but it's been showing how you can do it right. And it's been working with agencies to rewrite job descriptions so that even though they're a very small and powerful team, they're really affecting who the agencies that they partner with hire and in what kinds of roles. And they're getting those agencies to hire people who understand and are going to operate in this new product model. Well, what they announced yesterday is that essentially CDS is taking over all of OIT and making a very bold and very clear statement that the whole state will now move to that model. And it will no longer be sort of this experiment where we're trying to show how it might be in the future, but they're making the full leap. The person who's been running CDS is now going to be the head of OIT. They're issuing, guidance and statements to everyone. They're taking a very new approach to partnership with the new agencies. And also, this is actually predates this big announcement, but they are, for instance, taking on an internal build with their own staff, some lightweight vendor help, but not a big outsourcing of their entire Medicaid enrollment and eligibility system, which I don't know of any other state doing, but they believe that this is something that they can do internally under the product model for far less money and far better outcomes, including the ability to actually then adjust, to have that software adjust and adapt when they need it to, without giving $50 million for every adjustment, like the adjustments that need to be made to, unfortunately, comply with the HR1's work requirements in Medicaid. To a contractor, theirs happens to be Deloitte. That's true in about half the states.
Ms.
So they're
Pahlka?
making this incredible change. Sorry, go ahead. I'm done.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in. We've got Commissioner Beyer would like to talk with you.
Please.
Good morning. We met many years ago, actually, in your Code for America, and I'm a big fan of your book, which is top 25 in subgroups of public welfare, public management. So your insights have helped many, many people. My question, I have two different kinds of questions. One is about food stamp SNAP and work that we, the Little Hoover Commission, did. We issued a report in December of last year. And it's very much like what Colorado has done on Medicaid. That's what we recommended. And so what I want to focus on is, if you have any comments about our report from last year, that'd be great if you read it.
I'm sorry, but I haven't. Yeah.
But hopefully it's worth it because of your work in California about all the impediments. And we go through, after a number of hearings, how to use technology to improve the outcome in the SNAP program in terms of eligibility and workflow and things like that. So it's very specific. My question really is, if you think about the big buckets that are necessary for change, and at least this is my summary of what I think you've written and have experienced, One is you have to get to scale. Second, somebody has to be in charge.
Someone has
And
to be in
third,
charge.
you have to change the law to deal with either data silos that are mandated by state or federal law
Yes.
and job codes which are written for the 19th century or early 20th century. And so one of the big wrap-up question is, how do you get from a consensus about the maladies to a consensus about the solution? It's tempting to think of it as, oh, the new governor can do this. Gavin Newsom's been, I think, very knowledgeable on this, and it has he has not yet succeeded. And the legislature is a limited tool, both in terms of how they can change the law and dictate different conduct. The agencies have problems. So how do we get a consensus, a leadership consensus about this new product-oriented use of technology as opposed to bending silicon in big procurements? What are the key ingredients?
Yeah, it's a very hard question, and I think it would be helpful to sort of get the story from the folks in Colorado about how they got to where they are. I think some of it is certainly that they had good proof points, and so it was, incontrovertible evidence that, that this was the way that should be scaled. I think where we have gone wrong and most states go wrong is essentially picking on a piece or two or three of the overall model and saying, if we do these things, we will get it, instead of saying, in order to change how we work, we have to align how these projects are funded, how they are staffed, the team structures, the roles, as you mentioned, what kinds of people are they hiring for? What authority to make decisions do they have? Is somebody accountable? How they do their road mapping and prioritization practices, what kind of metrics of success they're held to, and what the oversight looks like on the back end. There's probably a couple other pieces too, but those are sort of the big pieces. And the problem is, if we move one or two of them, it becomes sort of performative, essentially. Like, oh, we've added user-centered design. That's great, but all the other pieces are operating in the old model, very often including the oversight. So like, you have a team that is starting to operate in the way that you want them to, but you have other bodies within government saying, constantly slapping their wrist and saying, you didn't comply with that, or we think this was insufficient planning, or whatever. And it's just like, it's like grading somebody on, how they're playing checkers when they're actually playing chess. Like, it just does not work. And so until you have an understanding of the whole operating model and the political will to do all of it, and I don't mean all of it at once in one fell swoop, but a commitment to shifting all the pieces that need to shift, and an understanding of the everybody who holds power in this process about why this will be better for them, you will have, one step forward, two steps back.
So if you had a magic wand for the next governor, whoever that is, would you assign overall responsibility to government operations, which has all the subparts working for it, and give it authority and give it budget? I mean, right now they've created sandboxes of 21 fellows with the state employment population of 230,000. That's performative. In other words, have somebody in charge, have a budget of more than $100 million a year, have outcome aims, that is, goals that are identifiable and shared, and break down the silos, the data silos that have been constructed either by law or practice. Is that a reasonable agenda for the next governor?
I think the data silos start to fall once you have the new operating model in place. There's certainly a barrier. I would study what Colorado is doing, and I think I've already shared a bunch of the documentation that you'll get on the back end of this, and try to figure out who will fight against this and actually have a defense, like both an offensive and defensive plan. Will the unions tolerate the kind of changes that need to be made to the to the workforce. By the way, when Colorado announced this, they also laid off 173 people, which is actually not very many in the context of their whole IT department. But it was making a statement, I believe, about what they needed to clear out in order to operate differently. I don't know how they decided who to lay off exactly, but you're going to have to not just figure out how all the pieces come together, but figure out who is incentivized to keep the status quo in place and figure out how to deal with that. Because California has a whole bunch of forces, I think, that keep it from change. That resist change for a whole bunch of sort of unrelated reasons.
Thank you.
Sorry, that's a little depressing, but I think you can do it. Very hard.
Yeah, this is Pedro, and I'm not really familiar with the Colorado legislature. California has a full-time legislature, meets for many months. I'm trying to understand the Colorado General Assembly, for example. They have an interim schedule. They meet during certain times of the year. If Colorado, and I don't know if maybe if staff knows this or if anybody else knows it, in many of the Western states, the legislature is part-time, which means that the executive branch has a significant amount of influence and power. I don't know if that's the case with Colorado's legislative calendar. And clearly, when you have the ability of a governor to exert that kind of influence over the process, and if that governor agrees that there should be a change made, like the one that you are talking to us about, it gets simpler. And you did point out that in response to Commissioner Beyer, the issue of the various stakeholders who have interest in when there is a change. So I think as we look at, as California looks at, how do we take a bite and to move this away from inherited legacy systems that I think we're hearing from everybody who has experience with this doesn't work. We've got to also give some consideration to how do you get stakeholders that we have in California agreeing that this is the right kind of change to make. And I think one of the things that I'm learning as we go through this process is, it's complicated, but it's made even more complicated by departments and agencies who have invested in what I call the speed dial orientation, which is you want to do what you already know how to do because you know how to do it, even if it doesn't work. That's right. Because you know how to make that you've got the speed dial. So part of what I think we've got to make sure that we're conscious of is headwinds, right? What is it that discourages interest groups from making changes, even though it would be more efficient, that more people would be better served, and that's sort of an abstraction that is hard to get over until you have a crisis, right? The crisis sort of focuses the attention, and I don't know that we have a crisis, or we may have it, but we don't see it because we're so used to it.
We're in a boiled frog crisis for sure that has its spikes like COVID. I mean, I'll tell you that this was years ago, and I don't remember who was a controller at the time, but there were folks in California State, in California Department of Technology, who were really trying to move toward. They were trying to align the funding mechanism. So, like once you fund something as a giant, multi-$100 million thing, it's pretty doomed, right? Like, and so they'd gone to, they'd tried to get funding in a sort of incremental, in an incremental way that would support the product model. Again, I haven't gone into all detail about this, but like this is a key element of the product model. And what they got back from the controller was, do not bring me these things. I need the largest budgets that you can package it all up. Yes, it's 15 years of development or whatever. Like, package it all up because I don't want you to come back to me. I don't want to hear about it later. Well, we're going to pay orders of magnitude more money if you want to do it that way, and the outcomes will be bad. And so if this is what I mean about aligning the pieces. So that's an internal piece. I mean, there's also people in agencies who don't want to do this for all the reasons you just explained. And then there's folks for whom the system works very well, like many of the vendors. I think some of the vendors for sure can be forces for change for the good. I would not say they are all going to fight this, but some of them certainly will if it means that their contracts are going to change. And I would agree with you that the legislature ends up being, unless you do a very, very heavy legislative education and really get people on board, they become a vector for the lobbyists from these vendors. You know, there's a lot of them, so you can find a lot of them to go say, wait, why didn't you do this? Oh, here's a piece of guidance from back in the 80s that I can use against you, agency, for making a decision that didn't benefit this vendor. And it's a real problem.
Right. Let me, Vice Chair Cannella, do you have any insight based on your experience as a senator? Not that I put you on the spot.
So much insight. I just don't know that I have enough time to share it all. So.
Okay.
I hear there are stories there you're not telling us.
He's saving it for his memoir. So, we gleefully joined in on your discussion. Do you have any additional points you'd like to share with us?
I would just encourage you all to read what Colorado put out. I think that California has a real opportunity, especially, we'll have a new governor. But I think that it's also important to recognize that the path that California has been on has been a little bit different from Colorado's. And I'm happy to dig into that, offline or whatever. But okay. I'm both hopeful, and I see it as a pretty big mountain to climb for the state.
Now I'm going to go to Commissioner Garcetti before I go to Beyer. And you're muted. Gil, I'm sorry, you're muted. There you go.
No,
you're still
Commissioner Garcetti, you're still muted.
I know now.
Okay.
There you go.
All right. Let me just ask you if I might. Been listening to you hard. I've read what you've written. You have great credentials, everything. Bottom line for me, what I'm hearing you say is we need real leadership. Leadership from some organization within state government or some person that really knows this subject matter and understands you got to grab a hold of this and make substantial changes, and you've got to start doing it now. Am I right or am I wrong? Is this an exaggeration?
It needs leadership at many levels. You need a leader for CDT or whatever it becomes, that understands the product model for sure. But I have seen many, many great leaders come into states that, could be able to succeed in another environment, and they simply don't have the backing of the people above and around them. And so the alignment, there has to be a full court press from lots and lots of outside actors to create the space in which a good leader can succeed.
You don't have to answer this question, but which of the candidates for governor meet that qualification?
Thanks, I won't answer
so
that.
Will pass.
And by the way, I'm now a Virginia voter. We moved. We're back in California in the summers, but I don't even get to vote, so I won't share.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Aaron has joined us with her absolutely stunning eyewear, but let's go to Commissioner Beyer.
Let's go to Commissioner Aaroner first.
Oh, she doesn't really have to. She doesn't want to say anything. She's just showing off. She's just showing off.
Okay. So I have two questions. One, you were there at the beginning of the U.S. Digital Service and 18F, which I think most of my colleagues probably aren't unfamiliar with. How did President Obama manage to create those entities and sustain them, frankly, even through President Trump's first term? What did they do? Why did it work? And were they at the right scale, or were they just sandbox experiments in individual agencies and never got to be embedded into the whole OMB budget process?
It's a great question, and one that I don't have time to answer thoroughly. I will say, um, USDS exists because of crisis. I was there, beating my head against a wall. It was not going to happen, even though we, in theory, had support for it, until healthcare.gov failed. And I would have gone home absolutely defeated if it had not been that the ground shifted, and even then it didn't shift. That we had to make the crisis be relevant in ways that are too long. The stories are far too long to tell here, and they involve some intrigue. But we did get that off the ground. It survived the Trump administration, honestly, just because that was very much personality driven. It's not a replicable thing that is worth discussing. Did they remain a sandbox? Yes and no. I think we would pretty much all agree that at the end of the day, it was those both groups were vulnerable for a whole lot of reasons. But yes, when USDS was turned into the US DOJ service and essentially disappeared over the course of a couple of months, what remained was some teams and agencies. So the Veterans Administration CTO team, not everything, not the medical record stuff, has been completely transformed, and it is not going away. And that was a 14-year battle, but it really is durable. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services also done great work. State Department online passport renewal. It planted enough seeds around government that I think it did have a lasting impact, but the unit itself was never empowered in the way that Colorado has just empowered CDS.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you for your testimony. I mean, you clearly have a really deep appreciation and understanding of this area, and it's going to be helpful to us as we begin to craft our recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I'm really glad you're doing this.
Daniel, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next, we have two witnesses from the Office of Data and Innovation. The first is Jeffery Marino, who has served as Director of the California Office of Data and Innovation, or ODI, since January of 2024. He first joined state service in 2020 as a volunteer on the COVID-19 Data Insights Working Group. He later joined ODI as Deputy Director for Service Innovation and most recently served as Deputy Director of Strategy, overseeing government and legislative affairs, communications, and Cal Academy, ODI's statewide training division. He earned a master's degree in critical theory and comparative literature from the University of California at Santa Cruz. Our second witness is Crew-Renzo, who serves as Deputy Director of Government Affairs and Innovation Training at the California Office of Data and Innovation, or ODI. She serves as ODI's Efficiencies Program Director and leads the Governor's Innovations Fellow Program. Previously, she served as ODI's Chief Innovation Training Officer and founded Cal Academy, the office's statewide workforce training initiative. Anne earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from St. Mary's College of California and a master's degree from the University of Notre Dame. Director Marino and Deputy Director Crew-Renzo, you may begin your testimony.
Well, thank you. Thank you to the chairman and to the commission for having us today. Much like Jen, I had remarks prepared, but changed them, or will be changing them for a different reason, as I might have anticipated, because I was sure that she would be sharing some brilliant insights that might change my very perspective on the spot of what we should be sharing with you all today. So before I begin, though, however, I do want to recognize my colleague here, Crew-Renzo. I hope that you can tell from her title as an executive within the Office of Data and Innovation, being our Deputy Director of Government Affairs and Innovation Training, the unique perspective that we bring to this work and the importance of building relationships within government, in addition to building capacity at state departments in order to improve the way that we deliver services. I also want to acknowledge the previous testimony from both Amy Tong and Mike Wilkening that you heard last month. Both of those individuals are mentors of mine. And both of those individuals were, in the testimony just now with Jen, in terms of the great question from Commissioner Garcetti around leadership. They both embody that leadership, and I watched them blaze new trails in this regard. And I watched them struggle, and I struggled alongside of them. And I'm honored to continue to carry that work forward in this administration and hopefully beyond. So briefly, I'll say most of what I have heard in the previous testimony thus far is essentially that this system is broken and it has to be replaced. I will tell you, as a relative outsider to public service and government service, I joined in 2020 as a volunteer during the COVID crisis. That's when I discovered that ODI existed. It was only established in Governor Newsom's first budget in 2019. I believe there were 2 actual full-time employees at ODI at that time. And I came from a background in the private sector, volunteering to do some data work at that time, and discovered ODI, discovered we could do this kind of product work in government. And I was absolutely taken by that fact and fell in love with the mission. And it's now become my life's work. And so I will say that I have watched from up close as ODI has attempted to bring this kind of really ultimately culture change to the work that we're doing in order to, we can talk about IT projects, we can talk about procurement reform. Ultimately, what we're talking about is how do we improve service delivery for Californians? How do we improve those outcomes and provide the value that Californians expect to be delivered by their government? And so ODI was really designed to work very closely to where that delivery happens, from that product approach, using data design, and ultimately building department capacity. So we tend to see these challenges from the ground level and are asking what actually needs to happen in order to improve the service and make it work better for Californians. I want to share one key observation that I have had in the 4 or 5 years thus far serving in public service and at ODI. And I have become a real student of IT projects, IT structural, organizational models. And this is something that I think about day in and day out. How can we improve the structures, the organization, and the capacity in order to make this work better? As Jen mentioned, regarding the product approach, these are all things that are well documented, that she has documented very well in many of her writings, and that don't have any sort of magic or secret sauce. I think the big challenge that we face in the mountain that we have to climb is how to make that work in government, because it primarily depends upon a culture of collaboration, curiosity, a beginner's mindset, the ability to work cross-functionally and across organizations, all of which, as I'm sure all of you know, are very difficult to make happen in government. And so what I have seen is that many IT project failures are not fundamentally because of the technology or even because of a procurement process or a failure in oversight, that they're fundamentally capability and capacity failures within our organizations. So oftentimes we're solving for the wrong problem or investing in the wrong place. And those better outcomes require us to empower the people closest to the service delivery. Those people that are closest to Californians understand the operational realities best. They know where the residents get stuck, which forms generate calls, overwhelm call centers, confuse people where policy, technology, and workflows don't line up. And so if we want to improve those outcomes, we need to redefine the way that government operations sees itself, not as an arbiter of policy implementation and oversight, but rather see ourselves as capacity builders and service providers in our own right, equipping state staff with the tools, data, and authority that they need to serve Californians well. And so I will just share with you from the early days of, and also I want to mention, Jen mentioned the sort of funding models that all need to align, and how some sort of startup style funding was brought to the controller and sort of sent back. And actually through Amy Tong and Wilkening and others' leadership, along with ODI and a sort of second iteration of our department, the Data and Innovation Fund was established. And this was really sort of that startup fund, so we could have funding that would help us to partner with departments, go through a process of problem definition, and then help to prototype an early version of a solution and test whether or not it works with real Californians. And so that concept that has proven to work and works very well in the private sector, that we have proven can work in government, was put in place like 5 years ago. And we were trying to implement that very early on, and we're very naive about our ability to do so because of a lack of awareness, generally, broadly speaking, across the sort of bureaucratic apparatus of the product mindset, and how we can take an alternative approach to the traditional IT project model. A lot of these IT project models and failures often happen and are still happening because of a lack of alternative, right? And so, but when we brought these alternatives forward, especially early on, we were really met with mostly confusion and the response of, we don't have time for this. And so when we went out for a call to say, bring us your problems, we did a sort of solicitation, and we'll collaborate with you on some strategic solutions, none of which are going to include an IT procurement, a budget change proposal, an IT procurement, or any of those traditional approaches to the model. What we were perceived as early on, and we've made a ton of improvement in this regard, and I would love to share that with you, where we're at now with the Innovation Fellows, with the great work that Annie's doing. Where we were perceived early on was a unit internal to state government that would perform the same form and function of a large systems integrator and technology provider. And so we were asked, build us this application. And then when we responded, we're not sure that you need an application. Actually, let's go talk to some users and let's see what's going to actually solve the core problem. In the case I'm thinking here was a department that wanted to increase their response rate to public comment requests. Their hypothesis was that a mobile app would solve that problem. We questioned that premise. Ultimately, we got to a great place and great outcomes, not building an app, by the way, but it was a very painful process when the department approached us with a request, again, following that same kind of culture and approach that we treat frontline staff with in government, of being ticket takers, where we were asked to build something. We challenged the premise of whether or not it would actually solve the problem, and it became a conflict, right? I mean, we had to really work through and talk through why are you questioning what we're saying we need in order to improve the problem? We're the experts in this space. And so this is where the Governor's Innovation Fellows program has really created an inflection point in the work that we do. Because, and this is a challenge that I have colleagues at all of the innovation departments that Jen mentioned, in New Jersey and Colorado. And these are similar challenges that we have seen across the board in innovation departments in these other states, where we are often seen as, and this was a pattern that honestly was established with the healthcare.gov crisis and US Digital Service, where the sort of tech saviors were asked to parachute in to fix a problem that traditional government was otherwise unable to fix. And early in the establishment of these innovation departments across the country, we've also seen early on our leaders looking to bring people into the innovation departments who will be disruptors. And disruption as a virtue oftentimes is viewed as a virtue in technology and innovation space. What I learned, and based upon that previous example that I was sharing with you all, is that for innovation to be successful internal to government, our department cannot take this stance of being a disruptor,
Right.
because we will quickly be ushered out of the room. And so what we need to do is build goodwill, build partnerships, and provide a viable alternative pathway to success, because no one that is going through these processes and of budget change proposals, the PAL process, now the PDL process, none of them want to fail. None of them want to spend 10 years or $1 billion on something that's not going to provide outcomes for Californians. But ultimately, it's that partnership building that the Governor's Innovation Fellows has really allowed us to supercharge, because they've been able to come in with a beginner's mindset, with a non-threatening approach, and with an internal to government subject matter expertise, but with a charge to innovate and partner with departments to find alternative solutions to the status quo. And I've got several examples that I'd love to share with you how that's working right now.
Good. Let me, Commissioner Byer, you've prompted something from Commissioner Byer, but my reaction to what I'm hearing you speak of, and I also think that this is something that Annie can contribute to, is as I listen to you, and I'm old, okay, so I'm an old guy, but I see that there's going to be that there could be a conflict just with the language, because there's terminology with which you are extraordinarily comfortable because you work in this area, and you are an example of what I cherish about people who work in government, because you come to it wanting to do the best. You come to it as a calling. And I've always maintained, I've been so lucky to have been a member of the legislature and to have direct experience with staffers who work in the building and people who work in agencies who have decided that they're going to apply their God-given talents to trying to provide the best possible service to people in the state of California. And I hear what you are talking about, and some of it I understand and some of it I don't. But I get what you're saying in terms of how you can be perceived, and it is really a class clash of culture. There are certain aspects of what you know, and the language attributable to your discipline that's foreign to people who are working in agencies. And I'm guessing that, and if I may call you Anne, that as a deputy director of government affairs, that this is something that you have run into right head first. But let me call on Commissioner Byer.
But thank you, and thank you for your testimony. You may not be the best witness, but the question that Pedro asked before about the legislature, Colorado's part-time, $43,000 a year, they're not the same. So my question really is about how to create this consensus about a product-based model by educating one at a time, committee by committee, the legislature about the necessity of change. Because right now, even the best governor, the best senior staff in a governor's office has to deal with the embedded processes, and the chair and former members of the legislature know this much, much better than anybody else. It's okay, well, there's the May revision, there's the budget allocation, there's the budget process within the executive branch. The entire system of government is aimed at making decisions about large things. It is not aimed at changing culture. And so the oversight process is, to some extent, a combination of gotcha, that is, you screwed up and you spent too much, and let's have a headline about a scandal, or some procurement error, some process violation. This group wasn't consulted, or this meeting wasn't timely, and we know that game too. How do we get to a narrative that's broadly understood that there is a better way that helps real Californians other than a series of very, very small sandbox exercises. Let's say we fix the appointment times at DMV. Well, that's great. It's an agency that has a lot of exposure to Californians, but it doesn't fix anything else. How do we get beyond the small bore fixes that the fellows could be aimed at and get to a larger systemic cultural understanding shared by both the executive branch and the legislature?
It's a great question. And I think that the culture change that's required is embedded in the question, because the product model and the basic premise that we're working from is that ultimate change happens, ultimate transformation happens, that third horizon that Jen was talking about, through a series of incremental successes. And so how do we get alignment and agreement that starting small and producing incremental successes that add up to transformation, large-scale transformation, is the aligned worldview that we agree on works well, and then incentivize that. And so right now, again, I would go back to, and I've had these conversations in terms of educating the legislature one by one, committee by committee. I'm still chipping away at that. But I will tell you that, again, they're operating within a model that they would also prefer an alternative to. And so rather than tracking scope, cost, and schedule and saying, oh, there's been an overrun, red light, no more money for you, we change that paradigm to say, show me that you can shorten the wait times for the DMV staff, and I'll give you that $1 million. And then once you show me that you've been able to do it, I'll give you the next $1 million so you can improve the next metric and the next one and the next one. And the reason, the structural reason, I think from the conversations that I've had with these folks, that we could get alignment, that would be a productive path moving forward of making change. But then you have the structural issues that you mentioned around an 18-month budget cycle. How do you align incremental change with getting one bite at the apple, where we're only incentivized to ask for the $1 billion because I've got another 18 months before I can get more money again? Right. So that's a structural issue that needs to be addressed. Again, we tried that with the Data and Innovation Fund. But you're absolutely right. And that's part of the challenge that we have in building and the momentum and continuing the goodwill, is that the incremental successes that we have aren't seen as good or big enough often. And so we need to continue to reinvest in that model and then watch it grow.
So how would you compare and contrast the way the private sector is addressing similar problems? And I'll use the current example of artificial intelligence, which every major company in the world is struggling with how to use.
Right.
But they're not struggling with it in a procurement sense.
No.
They're trying to struggle with it in a cultural sense and in a sense of how they're going to use it in their already existing processes. And so there's lots of fear, there's lots of trepidation, but they are changing how they're running their businesses. And I don't have that sense of urgency from the government.
Well,
Go ahead.
Commissioner Aaroner, I think, wants to jump in.
yeah, because and I really appreciate the testimony, and I'm sorry I'm not focused, but we're in the middle of a budget discussion going on right this moment in the state Senate, all right, so that everybody's paying attention to. But having said that, a couple of things, because the culture, for private business, Commissioner Byer, they just get to move money around with it instantly. They don't have to go to anybody else, right? The CEO says, I want to do this. He goes to his board of directors and they can do it instantly. Government doesn't run that way, as we all know. Okay, it's slow. But having said that, I really appreciate Jeffrey's comments, because the legislature, the question is is it the chicken or the egg, right? Do we need that the administration leads the legislature to where they want to go, or is it the legislature needs to lead the administration? In regards to technology, right? I actually think that the administration needs to lead the they need to guide the legislature as to what they want to do. But I think that there are mechanisms, right? I'm just thinking out loud. There's the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, the JLBC. It is a place where the governor gets to have some flexibility. When he wants to change his mind about something, he literally notifies this committee, right? And the two chairs of this committee are the two budget chairs, right, in the legislature. They simply notify the legislature that they want to move some money around, blah, blah, blah. And if it's okay with everybody, right, we do it. All the legislature does is say no. If they say that's it, if they don't say anything, it happens. If they do say no, then there's a discussion, obviously, about why would they object. So I think that there are mechanisms there, right, that maybe, not everybody is in tune with as to whether or not there's some flexibility in regards to doing something. Because I hear the issue, right? Appropriating a large sum of money, but it could be that you could appropriate something, but that the administration can control the flow of those dollars, right, with report back to the legislature regarding the flow. I just think that there are some options here that maybe we need to discuss further in regards to where is there the flexibility that the legislature needs and has in regards, because I just think I'm concerned about the legislature leading this discussion as opposed to the administration. The legislature doesn't have the capacity. That's why we're discussing it, right? Because they don't have and so the question becomes one of, if, as Jeffrey is saying, they're making some progress here in regards to changing the culture within the administration, right? Having worked with some large IT companies over the years when I was a lobbyist, right? I was always, the administration didn't have the capacity to acknowledge the kind of changes that are going on regarding product development, because it's about product development, right? And the fact that given the speed of which things are being are being devised, right? The state doesn't understand that and doesn't have the capacity in their purchasing process right now to respond in that way. I think that's what Jeffrey was talking about. It's exciting that someone's finally talking about, wait a minute, everybody, why don't we go to the users first of all? Even though in my my time in the legislature as a staffer and a member, we talked a lot to the users in the world that I was, involved with, meaning the Department of Social Services. We were talking to line workers all the time about what they wanted. They were at the table, but it didn't translate into, right, a system, whatever it was, whatever the technology system was, it didn't translate into a system that was friendly to them, right? And that they could understand and say, wait a minute, this really gets us where we need to go. And so part of it's really about understanding what the products are that are out there, and then saying, how do you, saying to the industry, right? Show us what you've got. Here's our problem, right? Show us what you've got, and let's see if it solves it. Because technology doesn't solve everything, right? Sometimes 3x5 cards really work. So anyway, that's my thought on this.
Yeah, if I could just add, I think that's an important point around the administration leading in the conversation. I do believe that that's part of what we're trying to do with both ODI and the Innovation Fellows, with the innovation showcases that we are trying to do. A lot of AI adoption is happening right now internally, but it's not real visible because no one, as part of this program, has asked the legislature to appropriate $1 billion for us to do it. Everybody would know about it if we asked for that. But nobody knows about it right now. So we're also trying to tell this story, but it's not a real flashy one. And so that, again, becomes another one of those challenges in terms of building the will, the momentum, and the political capital to keep programs like this running and successful, when the true story behind the theory of change is not a real flashy one.
You need to find a champion within the legislature. No doubt about it. Thanks.
I see Vice Chair Canella has his hand up, and at some point, we're going to hear from Ms. Crew-Renzo. You're not going to get away unscathed, but go ahead, Canelo,
Yeah.
please.
So, and unfortunately, state of California is a political system, and the minority party will always do whatever it can to make the majority party look bad, and it always happens, and it always will happen. So that's unfortunately something we have to live with. But it seems like these agencies that take on these big projects, and a lot of them have failed. There's no incentive to take chances, right? So if you are following a protocol that's always been in place, whether it fails or succeeds, that person is okay, or whoever's in charge is okay. It's like, well, this is the way we've always done it. So how do you change that mentality, or understanding we live in a political system and they're going to be before committees and they're going to be dragged through the mud no matter what happens? How do you give these bureaucrats, and I mean that respectfully, the courage to do something different?
I actually think that's a great one for Annie.
No pressure, right, Director? Thank you, everyone, for having me. Vice Chair Cannella, I think that's a very difficult question, not one that has an easy answer, but if I could just use an anecdote from the fellows that might be illustrative of getting at what you're talking about there, that when we bring new innovation fellows into the program, they have a sponsoring agency, they have a sponsoring department, they have their line manager who nominated them, and then they have the same group in whatever agency or department they're working in. Yes, in other words, lots of bureaucrats in the best light involved in the project. And so what our team does is we bring the fellows in, we give them training in the product approach, in human-centered design, in organizational change management, in their own executive presence, et cetera. We teach them how to write a product brief. To your point, Commissioner Nava, some of those language pieces that might be new to the fellows, as soon as we start working them through some of those processes, they say, wait a minute, this is how I've always worked. I've always cared about my customer. I've always put their needs first. What you're doing is just putting language on something that's already real for me. In other words, they're aligned to mission. And then they can go out to their initiatives, to their various executives, and they can talk about the work they're doing, to the director's point, in a very non-threatening way. And we have found that that's successful in getting those executives excited about this way of working. So they see the enthusiasm of their fellows and they see progress, yes, sometimes incremental, that's the product approach. In their initiatives, they feel jazzed about it, and that gives them some permission to be excited about a new way of doing things, right? It doesn't reduce the political reality that you described so well, but what it does do is provide some cover for them to empower their people to move in this direction, to work in this way. And then there was a question earlier about how do you change culture? And I think at ODI, we operate very much in the mechanism that President Biden used to describe about building the middle class, right? Top down, bottom up, and middle out. We're working with fellows who are mid-career folks. We're working with all these executive stakeholders. We're working with the fellows teams in their home departments. We're kind of working all around to bring folks into this common alignment to mission. In the private sector, right, we're focused on effective products that generate income, et cetera. In government, we're focused on building trust. When the DMV works well and people are like, oh man, what a pleasure to go to the DMV, that builds trust in government. That's our bread and butter. That's what we want to do. So when the fellows come in a department that's struggling to, with its various departments across the counties in California, or excuse me, various offices across the counties in California, give folks who are working directly with Californians access to a piece of information they need. And our fellows say, here's a Power BI dashboard that we built. I'm going to teach you how to use it. It already exists in your tenant, and then you can have access to this information you need. It's updated in real time. And the folks in the department, in the offices are like, yes, exactly, perfect. Now I can provide better service to Californians. It's not a major change, but everyone involved in that project is now like, oh, okay, this is what product approach really looks like. It builds better outcomes for those Californians, better outcomes for our colleagues who are state employees, and it builds trust in government. Because the people who go to those offices in the various counties and they get the information they need more quickly and they have access to their benefits, that provides that platform for the change you're describing. I don't have a good answer for the big problem, but I do know that the fellows are making a difference. Director, what would you add?
Well, I would add, and this is, I think, core a core question about maybe came up earlier with Jen's testimony around scaling and how do we get this to be noticed and how do we get this model to make real big impact, which is to say, the Power BI dashboard that Annie mentioned, that would have otherwise, I promise you, that would have otherwise been a multi-year, multi-million-dollar IT project. And it would have happened in that way because of lack of an alternative. That would have been the path of least resistance in the status quo to getting to that point. So what we're proving we can do is provide an alternative approach. And I do see a virtuous cycle happening where, because that alternative approach is saving money and saving time, that we will continue to grow in adoption, hopefully get more support for having more fellows and growing a program like this. I will also say that the budget situation really sucks. And so part of the reason why an executive order came out was building internal capacity. Again, this is going back to that sort of crisis scenario where we didn't have the money to fund these projects, but based upon the status quo. And so in that sense, we were forced to scale this small internal team that we had already seen proven to work. But in terms of the comments made earlier around our scale versus the scale of the state of California, the sky is really the limit. But also we need to do that at the pace that the organism is capable of taking on the change. And so finding that balance too, I think, is one of the core challenges we have.
I'm gonna guess, and this is both, if I may, for Jeffrey, and is it Annie or Ann?
Thank you, Chairman. My mom calls me Ann. All my friends call me Annie. I'll answer to either one. Thank you.
Okay, just don't call you late for dinner.
Yeah.
So do you folks have resources or money to help educate and promote, let's say, the committees, or is this a situation where you'll sit down with a committee consultant or with a member of the legislature and describe what it is, the results of the change that you've implemented? Because sometimes I think that if you have a client or a customer or an individual who received their benefits on time and they were able to stay in their home, or got the money necessary to ensure that they had their wheelchair, or that they received the benefit that made a tremendous difference in their lives. Those are the sorts of things that, as a member, have a different kind of impact. See, if I'm sitting, as a representative at that time of the 35th Assembly District, and I have somebody show up who is telling me about how, their children can now go to school after having had a decent breakfast, and they have what they need in order to have some dignity in their life, that has a different impact on me than as much as I would enjoy sitting with Jeffrey and talking about how you made things better. If I have somebody I'm looking at whose life has been made better, I'm going like, okay, I can connect with that individual and realize I'm not fighting for a program change. I'm fighting for a person's life. And I just don't know if you have the resources and the ability to sort of put that kind of thing together, because I think what you're doing with the fellows is absolutely brilliant. They become, first of all, you have buy-in from the agencies, and then the fellows get educated and oriented into how it is to improve what's happening, and they become the ambassador of success, right? So the agencies have now invested in this person. They have a desperate need for them to succeed because they want to experience that success as well, and to have the bragging rights about how they made it better. So what you're doing with the fellows is really very insightful and moving, because you're getting results from it. Because you take somebody who didn't know, just like me listening to Jeffrey's recitation of how to do this thing. Now I can go talk to somebody and use my language, right? Johnny Carson language from 170 years ago to say, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to make it better. It's just absolutely stellar.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, we appreciate those remarks because that was part of the strategy, certainly part of the strategy, and part of ODI's strategy, frankly, in terms of building the champions and building those ambassadors who can continue to tell the story, because the storytelling is such an important component here. I want to share one concrete example with you, and I'd love to get everyone's reaction in terms of how that model might work in terms of the describing to the legislature, because we worked recently, and this information's available on our website, and we can follow up with it afterwards, recently with the Department of Social Services on this serious problem around EBT theft. And one of the core issues that they had was just access to their data. The EBT system, as some of you may know, it does not operate on the traditional banking system. So all of that great technology in terms of fraud detection that EDD has at its disposal, because they're operating through B of A or what have you, EBT does not. And so we needed to get that data in the hands of the data analysts in the Department of Social Services so they could actually use it to detect those indicators of fraud. So we built a data pipeline that got the data in their hands. We built them a statistical model that would flag those anomalies and then handed it over. And now they're continuing to improve upon that. And within the first month of the pilot running that, we went from 20 million lost in a month to 3 million lost in a month. That is improving every month. Enforcement actions are increasing. And that's a great story from a cost savings perspective or a cost avoidance perspective. But think about the human story there when it comes to someone who has an EBT card that has been stolen and they can't buy food for their family. In the work that we did with DSS, it was an early indicator of potential fraud, and the cardholder was notified to change their PIN immediately. So they were able to prevent the fraud from happening in the first place. So they didn't have the experience of losing access to their benefits because a thief came and took them. And then they didn't have the experience of retroactively going back to the department, complaining, proving that they were stolen from, waiting for a reimbursement check, all the while not being able to feed their family. Now, the struggle that we often have is that story is telling the story of we're proving a negative. We're proving something that never had to happen in the first place. This is also our challenge with the avoiding large IT projects. We're proving that you didn't have to invest $1 billion, but then that sort of easily goes unnoticed, because that's why in this innovation in government model, the fixing of a crisis has been what's taken off in terms of the storytelling. But it is telling the story of the negative or the thing we were able to avoid that is just so challenging for us.
Let me ask you before I go to Vice Chair Cannella. Are there prosecutions of people who get caught stealing the cards? If you know.
Yeah, I would want DSS to speak to that, but I would venture that yes, there are.
It depends on the size. It depends on the size of the amount of dollars we're talking about, because when you take it, it goes to the local district attorney probably, and the DA then makes a decision: is it worth it to go after that person?
Right.
If we're talking about $5 as opposed to $5,000, okay.
Right.
And so very often, and that's the frustration very often of special investigators at welfare departments, is that someone has committed a crime actually, but is it worth it to prosecute it?
Yeah, because and I'm thinking about Commissioner Garcetti, and I myself am a former deputy DA, and just a couple of focused prosecutions and publicity surrounding the prosecution of someone who stole a card is a way to then get into the story about how these changes have say you went from 20 million to 3. I mean, that is a tremendous, right? A difference in impact. But sometimes, you got to put somebody in jail so they can see somebody, perp walk before they go, oh, look at that. Jeez, look what that program did. They helped catch a crook. Vice Chair Cannell.
Thank you. I feel better just hearing that story. So there's so much negativity about all the fraud and everything that's happening, is that there's this narrative being painted that nothing's being done. And that is such a great story that I wish they would report on that sort of thing. I think it would give people a lot more faith in California and when what's being done. So thank you for sharing that.
All right, let's turn to our witnesses. Are there any additional points that you want to raise before I ask Daniel about our next witness?
Annie, any final thoughts?
No, thank you, Director. Just thank you to the Commission for having us. We really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Now, well, and thank you for the work that you do. And I'm actually grateful that perhaps the Commission can play a role in helping to inform people of the work that's going on and how much more needs to be done as well.
And Director, I'll share out some of those materials that you mentioned earlier with the Commission, a couple of the blog posts on projects that the fellows have worked on, if it's of interest.
Yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely, you bet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Opportunity. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it.
All right, Daniel.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Marianne Bates is the Executive Director of the California Cradle-to-Career Data System, or C2C. Marianne previously served as a senior fellow at the White House Office of Management and Budget and as the Executive Director of the JPAL North America at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She holds a Master of Public Policy from the University of California, Berkeley. Ms. Bates, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you. Thank you to the chair. Thank you, commissioners. I'm happy to be here today and to have this conversation with you. I was excited to take on the role of being the inaugural director of the California Cradle-to-Career Data System because I spent my whole career in data and evidence, and every time the phrase data sharing agreement was uttered, innovation came to a screeching halt. And I saw this opportunity to lead C2C as a once-in-a-career opportunity to build something that can really change the data ecosystem in California, and by extension, how we think about innovation. So what we do is we take information the state has already collected and we break it out of its silos. And we bring the data together that people need to make decisions in their own lives across the state and to make informed decisions here in Sacramento. So I want to start with a quick overview of what we've built and then tell you one story of a massive expansion to the data system that happened last year in a quick and smooth process. So the Cradle-to-Career data system is a whole of government effort that's been championed by the governor, by the legislature, the state's education and workforce leaders, advocates, researchers, and practitioners. And we're really grounded in inclusive decision-making and transparency. And one aspect that's really important and is written into our section of state law is our key identity as being a neutral source. So if we can go to the next slide. We're building data tools for the people of California, and think of these in roughly 3 buckets. So the first is the linked longitudinal data set, where we do the linkage and stewardship, including technical, legal, security, and privacy issues. This is the foundation of what we're building. From that, we then create data tools and resources that the public can touch and feel. And we also partner with others to reduce administrative burdens for students. So I'll show you 3 quick examples of each of these, if we can go to the next slide. We are currently linking data from 16 major entities across the state, plus 2 agencies. And 2 things to note here. One, all of these entities have long been collecting data, and it was never meant to be linked. So linking the data across all of these partners is not a simple process. And I can talk more about how we do that if you're interested. The second piece is that each logo you see on this page, starting with TK through 12 education, 5 different entities for higher education, workforce and earning, social services, each logo represents in itself a massive scale. So let's just look at the community colleges, for example, 116 campuses, more than 2 million students. The Workforce Development Board, that means that we receive job training data from training that happens across all 45 local boards across the state, right? The Employment Development Department, EDD, and that's statewide data on earnings, jobs, opportunities. So there's a lot that's being brought together today already. Next slide. So from that, we then build dashboards for the public to use and put out data files. What you see here are screenshots from our first Student Pathways dashboard and the underlying data files that people can download. You can see these are targeted around questions people have. How much do students earn after they graduate? Right? How do students navigate to and through college? What does that look like? Each of the 6 pictures in our dashboard has 9,000 cuts of data behind it. And the reason we then also put the files out is so folks like PPIC and others then take that data and create their own data visualizations answering different questions from the ones we mentioned. Next slide. And then in terms of reducing administrative burden for students, I'll just highlight one example around CalKids. Many students have money for college in a CalKids account that the state has funded, but they don't know about it. And you've got to claim your account before you can put it to use. Now, the Scholarship Investment Board, which administers CalKids, they know which students have unclaimed accounts, but they don't know who's enrolled in college. On the other hand, the community colleges know where millions of students are enrolled, but they don't know which students have unclaimed accounts. So the Scholarship Investment Board joined our data system. We do the data linkage. Just our initial pilot cut of data found 40,000 community college students with over $20 million in unclaimed scholarships. We expect the next cut of data to find even more. We're then able to push that information to the community colleges, and then their campuses can use that to reach out and say, hey, Marianne, did you know you might have an unclaimed account? And have that real impact for students. We can go to the next slide. Everything we're doing is aiming to build for a nimble and scalable process. So just to give you a sense, I started this role just over 4 years ago in 2022. In 2023, 8 data providers submitted data. This spring, we had 16. And we were able to scale and grow in that way through trust and transparency, through a very strong and defined governance structure, and through one stable legal agreement that was first signed in May of 2022, and it has stuck even as new signatures get added. So I'd now like to tell you one story, if we can go to the next slide, about this major expansion to the data system and how it was set in motion via one vote at a board meeting last year. And the reason I want to tell this story is that when governance is done right, it can drive speed and innovation in the process. Should I pause before I tell the story? I see a hand.
Mr. Chairman, you're muted.
Commissioner Byer.
Thank you for your testimony and thank you for your work. My question relates to data silos and whether there are specific California laws that have different rules with respect to privacy. And so it also relates to the question about how much does the legislature know about the impediments to data sharing, and do they understand the benefits of data sharing in terms of producing better outcomes for Californians, saving money, making sure that students are provided scholarship money that's already been appropriated or set aside. In other words, how much do people know about what you do, and do they know about the impediments you face, both legal and structural, cultural, on data sharing?
Thank you for that question. So to your first question about the data silos, yes, the answer, if you look at the logos that were on that screen, right? Some of our partners primarily focus on restrictions in FERPA, others HIPAA, others the Higher Education Act, right? There are specific federal and state laws that vary based on where the data sits. So I think there are a couple of things that have helped us move through that with our partners. One is that there was a specific intentional 18-month planning process that preceded the launch of our office, where all the parties and their legal counsels were at the table to craft that overarching stable legal agreement. And it was written in such a way that it's compliant with these different federal and state laws, and it's really important. Another aspect of it that's important that I didn't fully appreciate until I was in this job for a few years is that our data providers retain ownership and control of the data that they link through C2C. And that means that when we get to a specific use case of using, for example, earnings data from EDD, or specific data from one of our higher education partners, they continue to be at the table to ensure that those use cases are in compliance with all of the relevant state and federal data privacy laws. And that's important because sometimes I hear people talk about breaking down data silos, and it's almost like they imagine literally demolishing silos and it all just pours into this vast lake, and then we stir at the pot, and magically, insights are going to emerge from that. And those guardrails and structures around who's making decisions about how the data gets used, not just initially when it's shared, but on an ongoing basis, is really important for maintaining trust and maintaining compliance with the privacy laws that exist. I think the other aspect of your question is so critical. Obviously, it's not easy to bring data together and link it, and there's got to be a reason why we do it. And lifting up these stories like the Cal Kids example, or highlighting, transfer students, people ought to know how hard or easy it is to transfer from community college to four-year, for example. Like, those are real issues that people face, and data can make it better. Having a specific reason why you want to bring the data together is what needs to catalyze, the movement towards signing legal agreements and doing this work. So one more tidbit on that: the original Cradle-to-Career Data System Act in 2019 that kickstarted that planning process actually had 6 bullet points in it that said, for example, we need to know the earnings outcomes that happen after college, or we want to understand the impact of financial aid, or what's the impact of the transfer student process. And because there were those special use cases written into law, it helped guide what data points would be added to the data system and for what reason. So starting with a clear why can really help.
So how much does the legislature know, and do they have the muscle memory to create those desirable outcomes for data sharing projects? In other words, do they understand that this is complicated, but they are partners in this, so that, as the chair said, they can tell their constituents, we've gotten more money for your constituents' scholarships than before because we shared information? And do they know that? Do they have oversight hearings about it? Or is it just all done in some back room by obscure bureaucrats?
Okay, thank you for that question. So yes, we are in hearings like many state entities, but I think the other part that was really wise in how the system got set up is that I report to a 21-member governing board, and that's a large board. About half that board is data providers. So the logos you saw on the screen, each agency or major department gets a seat on the board. The other half, we have 4 governor's appointees, then we have 4 legislative appointees and a senator and a legislator. And those 21 people, through a 2/3 majority vote of the members, are the ones who take decisions about which data partners are added, which data points are in the system, which dashboards we're going to build next. And this is all, of course, in public meetings with a lot of public input. In addition, we also have some advisory boards and a really robust structure for doing engagement with local communities. So part of what's really unique about this data effort is just how much it is in the public, and with structured seats at the table in the long term for the administration, for the legislature, for researchers, advocates, and our data partners as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Garcetti.
Ms. Bates, thank you. Hello. Thank you, Ms. Bates. How do people find out about you in your organization? Before this hearing, I knew nothing about you or the organization. This is fascinating information that should be shared to a much larger audience.
Yes, thank you for that. We're partnering with our partners and with the administration and legislature in getting the word out. I think part of the reason you might not have heard about it is that we only released our first dashboard last year. And I think as we release additional data tools across different topics, people are going to learn about it. That said, we do track our metrics pretty carefully. So the dashboard we released last year has been used by more than 80,000 people all across the state and beyond. And we're doing a lot of work with partners, whether it's local county offices of education or our data partners and others, to get the word out on these resources as well.
Keep it up. Get that word out.
Thank you. So yeah, I think you were going to talk to us about what happened during a 45-minute board session.
Yes, and exactly. Board items, the most exciting topic, but I think this is worth telling. If we can go to the next slide, please. So what were the necessary ingredients for this data expansion to happen? One of the key ones I will say is governance. And by governance, I just mean clarity about who gets to make which decisions about what and have that written down. And then, as I mentioned, start with really specific use cases, or you can also call this a learning agenda. So again, it can't just be that a bunch of data nerds are excited about bringing data together. We need to talk about the very specific questions that we can answer only with linked data, and then have that drive what data is added to the data system. And critically listening first, then building. We've done that throughout in deciding how the data system gets built, or even small questions like what colors should we use on our dashboard and how much information should be. All right, next slide. So the workforce data expansion. What we're talking about here is new data on who's participating in workforce training programs, who's participating in apprenticeships. This matters. If you look at our dashboard right now, it's mainly focused on higher education paths. And we really want to show a more complete picture of the paths people take to and through higher ed, workforce training, and into the workforce. So what were the key steps? One was governance, so clarity on what that governing board vote means in terms of adding new data partners and new data points, and what data control each department maintains. As I mentioned, that's critical. And part of that is the Cradle-to-Career Data System Act. That's what this screenshot is. Part of it is also this legal framework where we have been able to add new signatures to one stable legal agreement without needing to re-execute it each time. Next slide. And then another really important part of this was starting with a clear why. Why do this workforce data expansion? So the screenshot you see here is a memo from Secretary Knox, the Secretary at the Labor and Workforce Development Agency, to us at Cradle-to-Career, outlining why the labor agency wants to add more data to the data system. And this memo had a list of specific questions like, how do people in workforce programs who receive training, how do their outcomes compare to those who don't receive training, right? What happens when they later go on to higher ed or not, right? These are all questions that can only be answered when you're linking all of this data together. And that clear why was the starting point. We then discussed this in a public task force. And then if we can go to the next slide. Last May, our board then took a vote in one of its regular quarterly meetings to add new departments and to add these new data points to the data system. You can see us here in front of the seal after we took that vote. And then we used a very replicable process that we've used with all of our data providers to define the file upload specifications, like boring Word document that provides perfect clarity about exactly which data elements are going to be transferred, and then used our standard processes for transmitting and ingesting and validating the data. And this past spring, over 150 new data elements from 4 departments landed with Cradle-to-Career. Having all of that happen essentially in 1 year is incredibly fast. If you look at data efforts and how long it usually takes, just a 2-department data sharing agreement for a specific purpose can really take a long time. And so if we can go to the last slide. I'll just close with a few of these thoughts and would love to then continue the conversation. Sometimes a boring process that gets 2 teams to clarity, like that file upload spec document, is just as important as the fancy tech stack. And don't get me wrong, I'm also happy to talk with you about our tech stack. We only started in 2022, so we had the benefit of being able to do cloud-based options from the start. We use Snowflake. We have a really nimble process in how we work with the data. But I want to emphasize that it's not like throwing fancy technology at something it solves all the problems. And the second point is, if you want a moonshot to land, you'll need ongoing clarity about who gets to make which decisions about data. And that's fundamentally because we're working with the people's data. This is not Cradle-to-Career's data. It's not the state's data. It's the people of California's data. And when we're talking about data, it's really about people and the impact that they can have. So with that, I'm happy to answer other questions. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Looking to the commissioners, I think what Commissioner Garcetti said was a point well taken. And what I'm learning about this topic over the course of our two hearings is how much impactful work is being done by people that we don't know anything about. And it is because the nature of your work is improving services that tends to be looked at from the 30,000 foot level. And so we really don't have very many stories of the heroic efforts that are undertaken by people like yourselves, Ms. Bate, and other people that work in technology and making these improvements. And I do think that as you continue to have successes and you continue to improve people's lives, what Commissioner Aaroner said was with respect to champions, the ability to identify some people in the legislature who have platforms that can help you, like Senator Cabalden, that can help you publicize the improvements that have been undertaken and the way that people's lives in California have been made better. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Daniel, I think you're up again.
Thank you. Our final witness is Jennifer Saha, who is the founder and CEO of Golden Bridge Strategies, a government technology consulting firm that advises technology companies on public sector engagement and procurement strategy. Earlier in her career, she held executive level roles at the California Department of General Services, the Department of Finance, and the Governor's Office. Ms. Saha also hosts the GovTech Today podcast, which focuses on the relationship between the public and private technology sectors. She holds a bachelor's degree from UC Davis and a master's in public administration from the University of Southern California. Ms. Saha, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you very much, Daniel, Chair, Vice Chairs, Commissioners, and staff. Thank you so much for the opportunity to provide testimony today. I have provided everything I'm going to say to you in written form as well. So realizing I'm the one standing between you all and lunch, I will keep my remarks fairly brief. As Daniel mentioned, Jennifer Saha, I really focus today on working at the intersection of public sector mission outcomes and the vendor ecosystem that builds and operates the technology that Californians rely on every day. I'm here with a simple premise. If we want better IT outcomes, we have to modernize procurement as a product designed for usability, speed, accountability, and competition, rather than as a compliance obstacle course. Through my time in government and the private sector, something has become abundantly clear. The procurement process is far more difficult in California than it is in other states, other jurisdictions, and certainly the private sector. By recognizing this, I've built a business in helping companies navigate this procurement process. My ultimate goal in helping industry and the state is to work myself out of a job. It should not be so complicated that you need a consultant to help you master procurement. In 20 years working in industry, I've participated in no less than 6 procurement reform efforts. Today, I'll share some of the common themes from those efforts, as well as changes I think can be put in place to help overcome some of the difficulties. First, I think it's really important that we define what success looks like. Simply aligning public sector procurement to that of the private sector doesn't achieve government's objectives related to risk mitigation. I've yet to see a public sector entity that consistently gets it right on a continuous basis, but there are glimmers of hope, some of which you've heard about today. In looking at other public sector procurement systems, I find that those who seem to be doing it right have a few similar traits. These procurement systems are faster for low to medium risk buys. They're more reliable for complex IT delivery. They're more open to small or non-traditional vendors. they're more transparent end to end, and they're able to govern emerging technologies like AI or cybersecurity through contracting without paralyzing the market with burdensome reviews and red tape. For our California to get to this doing it right stage, I think there are a few categories of pain points that consistently surface. The first is a structural problem. As noted by previous speakers, we have a budget, procurement, and policy misalignment. We also have a modernization problem. That's where our legacy rules, processes, and systems slow our outcomes related to procurement. I think we also have a market problem in California. It is too hard for vendors to navigate and participate, especially small or emerging technology vendors that perhaps have never contracted in the public sector. And we have an execution problem at the state. Procurement teams at the various departments and agencies are overburdened with compliance work and very far deep in the weeds, so much to the point where it becomes difficult to see that overarching goal. I'm happy to dive into each of these categories with some suggested reforms that I think would consistently help government and industry. But in the interest of time and having provided these suggestions beforehand, I'd love to hear what areas of focus you all would like me to dive into. And then before I wrap, I do want to address why I think reform has been so difficult as well. So I'll pause. Anything so far?
No raised hands just yet, but
Okay.
I'm sure that we'll get some as you continue to share your information with us.
Sure. In a previous hearing, a commissioner justifiably asked, why hasn't this already been fixed if we know what the problems are? And that's an incredibly powerful question with a really complex answer. I know this because I've been working to fix it along with other far more brilliant minds, many of whom the commission has already heard from. The problem hasn't been fixed because procurement problems are usually not just procurement problems. The short answer is that procurement's trying to do too many things at once. It has to prevent waste and fraud and abuse. It has to prevent favoritism. It has to manage legal and political risks. It has to enforce policy goals, protect fairness and transparency, and still buy fast-moving technology well. Those are all valid goals, but together they make the system hard to simplify and very easy to keep adding on to. Reform also stalls for predictable reasons. Every failure tends to produce another review, rule, approval process, but almost nothing gets taken away. Authority is split across budget, procurement, technology, oversight, legal, and department leadership, so no one fully owns the whole delivery chain. And the incentives often reward avoiding visible mistakes more so than solving the problems quickly. On top of that, technology changes faster than procurement policy. My joke to many of my clients is that government technology is about 5 to 7 years behind that of the private sector. Things that were cutting edge in the private sector tend to trickle out to the public sector in about 5 to 7 years. Reform tends to come in waves, often after a crisis, and then it loses momentum. And because the system's so decentralized, departments can keep layering on their own practices even after statewide reforms are adopted. At the same time, vendors just want predictability and access. Oversight entities want control, departments want speed, flexibility, and policymakers want accountability. Durable reform has to reconcile all of those pressures. So in closing, I want to emphasize that many of the ideas discussed today are not new. They are certainly not mine alone. And over the years, public officials, procurement professionals, department leaders, vendors, and outside experts have all contributed thoughtful and practical recommendations for how to improve this system. That matters because it shows there's already a strong foundation of experience and insight that we can all build from. It's also important to recognize that the current administration is already looking seriously at many of these issues, along with other related opportunities to improve how the state buys, governs, and delivers technology. that ongoing work is encouraging, and I think the opportunity now is to build on that momentum and bring the best ideas together and move from diagnosis to implementation. If we do that, we can create a procurement system that's more effective for government, more accessible for vendors, and ultimately better for the Californians who rely on these services.
Thank you. I knew we'd get some commissioners. So Commissioner Byer, followed by Commissioner Sidley.
Thank you. I found your testimony really well done.
Good.
And being the last witness at the end of 2 hearings where the same topic has been discussed, you were very succinct and cogent. I have a question really about risk management. And if you think about it as a teeter-totter, on the one hand, there's to oversimplify, there's, oh my God, we got to prevent fraud. And on the other hand, why does it take so damn long and cost so much? And you proposed an idea that I want to dive into a little more, which is low and medium-sized risk projects. In other words, we have a one-size-fits-all procedural labyrinth that agencies and vendors have to go through, whether it's 5 million or 500 million. That seems dumb. And is there a better way to make sure that the anti-fraud measures do not end up in a Otoboro way, the snake eating its own tail, where the cost of going through the process defeats the purpose because it takes too long and creates too much uncertainty? So is there a way of dividing the world into lower and medium risk things that have a different procedure for implementation and continuous execution, as opposed to larger procurement systems, which for fiscal reasons, you want to have stricter rules?
Yeah, absolutely. It's through the delegation process. Very similarly to discussed earlier, district attorneys are not going to prosecute something if it's a couple $100,000. It isn't worth the time and the investment to prosecute that. It's not worth CDT and DGS's time and investment and staff review if it's under a certain dollar threshold. Those thresholds haven't been updated in a very long time. We just recently, and kudos to DGS and the administration for doing this, raised those dollar thresholds, meaning departments and agencies have more authority to conduct procurements under certain dollar amounts that are deemed lower risk, mainly based on the capabilities at those departments. So if I'm a department that gets it right a lot of the time, I don't have many procurements challenged. I might have a higher delegation level where I can execute contracts under a certain dollar amount that's higher than maybe a smaller department with less sophisticated procurement staff that they can do as well. But I think really speeding up the regulatory process means getting a lot of these things out of the regulatory process of DGS and CDT, out of the project procurement, project development life cycle. It's just not worth the time and investment to focus on these smaller dollar procurements.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sidley.
So, Jennifer, thank you very much for your testimony. I also was struck by the discussion about the fraud and changing procurement rules. And so my question sort of builds actually on what David Byer just said. I'm wondering, it seems to me that one of the things that is an outcome of good data is less fraud. And what I'm not hearing, which I think we need to discuss, is that, because waste, fraud, and abuse right now is so politically loaded. And you're not going to find a legislator who is going to vote against anything that weakens that. But actually, what we're talking about with the improvements is a better way to actually deal with the waste, fraud, and abuse. And I'm wondering how much is that part of the discussion? And as we do get these programs online, because you make it through the procurement process, but if you make it through and as you talked about, you've sort of proven something, are you seeing where some of the procurement walls are actually falling down because or some of the rules and regulations because they've proven that it's the right investment? And I understand that that's going to take time, but from a political leader, they need that to allow those rules to go away, because otherwise they're going to get hit in the next campaign. You're all for waste, fraud, and abuse, and then you want it.
Yeah.
And so I think, we're on that path of actually solving for that, but I'm wondering where it is in the discussion so we can give the politicians the tools to not get hammered in the next election cycle.
Yeah, I think it's a very valid point. I would even go a step further and break waste, fraud, and abuse up a little bit. Because I think it's incredibly wasteful to have decade-long IT projects that never come to delivery. And we are held accountable for that. Vendors, department staff, they lose their jobs, right? It's you have failed this project. And it's not fraudulent, it's not abusive, it's not illegal. It's just everybody trying to do their best in a system that isn't designed for the best outcomes. So I think there are a lot of things that you can do to sort of prevent the fraud and the abuse. I love that technology has come a really long way in this. Now we have a tool to help us in identifying and squashing and preventing that from happening in the future. But I think the entire system is really designed to be fairly wasteful. And it's because of that risk aversion that government has. Rightfully so. They're my tax dollars too. I don't want any of them wasted. I want you to be super cautious as a government with how you spend our money. But at the same time, all of those barriers build up a system that is unattainable for achieving our goals.
So yeah, I agree with you, and I think, in order to get a politician to be there to help you is to put that message that you've just put out there front and center. You're wasting money by not fixing these rules, and so help them help you. Through all the things that I've been hearing today, and I've mostly been a listener in today's hearing. That was the thing that struck me, because I know we've seen this in other hearings where we were talking about philanthropy and outside philanthropy, and people struggle to give money to the government. Well, why are you taking it from these people, and what do they owe them? There's so much fear right now about fraud and underhanded dealing and things like that. So the more we can talk about how these data projects, which actually get done and are successful, and so you're not wasting money, the more successful I think California can be with that specific tool in the toolbox. So thank you again.
Yeah, and you hit on something else that I think is really important. We always hear about the failed projects. We don't often hear about the projects that went well, and they are out there. We've heard from some of them today, actually. So highlighting the good along with the rough and the struggles, I think is something that's important. And I think probably the legislature and the administration could both be better about.
Yep. So again, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ms. Sam. I don't see any other raised hands from commissioners. Again, thank you for your perspective. You occupy an unusual situation, having had government experience as well as working in the private sector. So you provide that golden bridge, don't you?
Indeed, I do. Thank you for picking up on that crafty little company name.
You're very welcome. All right, thank you. Let me turn it back over to Ethan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this point, we can move on to item number 2 on the agenda, the public comment session. For members of the public who wish to make comment, please use the raised hand function in Zoom, assuming that you've joined via Zoom. If you have phoned into the meeting, email us immediately at littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. Give us your phone number so we know who to unmute if you are called on. But if you've joined via Zoom, just raise your hand in Zoom. That's the easiest way to tell us you wish to make public comment. Comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, a total comment period of 30 minutes. Commissioners will be able to hear you but not see you. I am told we have no one in the physical location wishing to make public comment, and we have not received any emails. And looking at the Zoom, I do not see any raised hands at this time. We'll give people just a moment. If you want to make public comment, raise your hand now. And if not, Mr. Chairman, I guess we can move on, close item number 2, and move on to item number 3.
Yeah, please, let's go ahead and move on to item 3.
So item 3 is the project and meeting schedule. Just briefly on 3B, I'll mention the future meeting schedule, and then we can move on to 3C. The schedule is that in June 25th, we will meet as scheduled for the third and final hearing, what we assume is the final hearing on IT project management. Commissioners may recall we canceled the July hearing in keeping with actually the Commission's traditional practice. August 27th, we are going to use for an implementation review hearing on our reports on AI and state government. We've actually had quite a bit of implementation of our recommendations on AI and state government, and so we're working now to prepare a hearing on that. Then September, we'll start hearings on a new topic. We can choose, the Commission can discuss and choose a new topic now, or if you prefer, Mr. Chairman, given that this meeting has now gone a couple of hours and a couple of commissioners have left, we can wait until the June meeting. There are only 3 witnesses at the June meeting, so there might be a bit more time, but that's up to you. Either way, we wouldn't begin hearings on the new topic until September, and we certainly have plenty to do at the staff level until then. If you want to have that discussion now, I can review briefly the relevant documents in the packet, or if you prefer to wait until June, we can do that in all of that in June.
Yeah, let me turn to the commissioners. I think what Ethan has identified is the June hearing. We only have 3 witnesses, so that you can expect is not going to take all that long, and it's on IT. And so we've discussed a fair amount of, the background and information on IT. I'm not opposed to having a further conversation on topics in June, but let me just open it up to commissioners that are still participating.
Mr. Chairman, I sent you and Ethan a note earlier in the week. There's a benefit, I think, of putting off the conversation until June, particularly with respect to housing, because the possibility of federal change, which would be the most material in a decade or several decades, could help inform the conversation about its timeliness. So that's one consideration. The other is whether it makes sense for you and the vice chair to help the other commissioners by winnowing down what's at this point a pretty long list, where there are some topics which are very big. Housing is an example where we might choose to narrow the topic to 2 or 3 subtopics instead of taking on the whole of a giant field. That might make the conversation better in June, but that's just a thought.
Okay. And anybody else? Because I tend to think we're going to have staff will have a little bit more time to work on some things, and I can also confer with Vice Chair Cannella. And in June, we're going to have more time to go over topics. All right. I think Commissioner Garcetti said okay. Commissioner Sidley?
I'm fine.
Okay. Well, by consensus, and I'm sure if Dion was available to speak, she would agree. So let's push this off until June.
All right, very well then, Mr. Chairman. And I think, particularly in light of the length of this meeting, we can skip item number 4, administrative update. We'll update the commission on other matters in June, but I think we're fine for now. So I think we've completed today's agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, well, great. And what I do want to take is just a moment to express appreciation and gratitude to Tamar, because it is my understanding that the program that the students from Berkeley are working on, that was her project that she brought forward. Is that correct, Ethan?
That is correct. She worked with the students she selected which students we were going to work with them on their projects and so forth. We also are planning to invite we have invited the 2 students who did those projects to very briefly present their papers at the June meeting. And I believe we know that one of them is confirmed already. So yes, I definitely want to thank Tamar for that work, and perhaps there'll be more discussion of those topics in June when we talk about future topics.
I see an eager buyer.
Yeah, go Bears.
Anyway, thank you, Tamara. I mean, a great initiative, and it's always very helpful to bring those kinds of fresh perspectives to the work that we're doing. And I think that really speaks well for the commission and also the effort that you put into it. Thank you.
So Pedro,
All right.
I just want to add, as I was looking through the calendar as we were talking about this, I actually have a conflict on the June meeting. I'll be on an airplane. That doesn't mean you have to change your schedule at all. And what I was thinking is I can just give some insight into the topics and the list that will be provided by staff, and I can just give that to Ethan and everybody. But going into this, I just wanted to let you know I have to fly to DC, which, trust me, is like poking myself with a stick. I do not want to do that, but I do have to do that. So I will be unable to attend the Zoom meeting on Thursday on that.
All right. Right. Well, safe travels.
Oh, I mean, the 4th of July stuff will be out there. I just,
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Not for me. Anyway.
All right, commissioners. Yeah. Again, yeah. Thank you. Thank you for your participation. I mean, this stuff on IT on the surface seems pretty complicated and dry, and the sort of stuff you're going like, oh, why do we have to do that? But then you begin to really understand and appreciate at the granular level, it is incredibly important to provide services to people who need the help.
So I'm sorry if I missed something. So we're doing the 3rd hearing in June, right, on IT. Any hints of what the topics are going to be? What the focus is going to be on that hearing yet?
Yes, Commissioner, that is the 3rd hearing on IT management. We actually, I believe, have the witnesses, although we haven't announced them publicly.
Oh, no, okay.
Could we email you that information?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering what the topic kind of is. What the topic is, because each one is kind of each hearing's been kind of focused.
Yes, the principal focus of that one, I'll just put it this way, is to take input from, although we had some of that today from ODI, but is to take input from state officials regarding current practices on IT management.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
All right. Again, kudos to staff for the work that you put together. Thank you, Daniel. It was very illuminating.
Great hearing.
And what happens, I think those members of the public who are interested and access our Little Hoover Commission page and see this material, I mean, it's a primer. You sort of condensed the information in a really easy and understandable format, and it's a great service. But anyway, everybody, see all of you when I see you next. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.